evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, resources that hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
So
you have no idea how much happier I am today than I was yesterday.
Yes, indeedy. Last night was not a good night. You know, I just saw Fox News, of all people, just called Michigan for Biden. So I think he's very close now to the 270 that he needs.
At this point, Trump would need a miracle.
Yeah.
Which I'm very happy to be. Last night was one of the worst nights of my life.
Yeah, I had difficulty. I couldn't stay up past about midnight. It was just too excruciating. And then my wife got up. She took the late shift. And when she came to bed about 4 or 5 with no news, I was like, I just kind of rolled over and went into a deeper nightmare phase, I guess, if you will. And I don't know, when did it finally turn for you in terms of your perception of what
I took a pill and went to sleep at about 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't have been able to go to sleep without a pill, which I don't do very often.
Yeah.
And woke up at about 9 and was absolutely delighted.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I could say to myself, it's 3-1 Biden. And as results came in and I learned a little bit more, I realized it was almost surely in the bag. And the piece I can give you now is that why there's a couple of states that are still undecided. Most of the votes in them are coming from mail-in ballots in Democratic cities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty predictable what those votes are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a much better world than it was 15 hours ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Arizona, Biden's up in Arizona as well. So that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's close. North Carolina's close. Georgia is close. But Biden probably wins even if he loses all those once he's got Michigan. Yeah,
right now CNN has him at 253. This is, just about 5 o'clock on Wednesday, November 4th. And so only Arkansas, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, and Pennsylvania have yet to be called.
Yeah. Yeah. And Nevada, I've actually checked, the votes that are out are mostly in Las Vegas, which is 55-45 Democratic.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So it's looking good.
Yeah. So, Dave, one thing that seems abundantly clear to me is that the polls were nowhere near close. The polls did not predict this close of an election. And I know we all got blindsided 4 years ago by the polls. And I think to some degree we kind of missed it a little bit this year as well. What do you think?
Well, you're clearly right. And so what I've been thinking about is, why is that?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this election came down to fear. There's always been a lot of racism out there. That's not enough of an explanation. But fear is powerful. And I think one of those fears is fears of the reaction of the poll taker to you saying you support Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're embarrassed of it.
Mm-hmm.
But who am I to say?
Mm-hmm.
What's right?
Folks said folks attributed that as one of the reasons 4 years ago as to why the numbers were skewed in the polls. That folks were secretly in their hearts backing Trump, but didn't have the guts to say it to the pollster that was on the phone with them.
Yeah, and pollsters all knew what they did wrong after the election last time, and they thought they had corrected for it, but obviously they haven't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now the other thing to look at is the Senate races.
Okay, where are we on that? I know that Susan, what's her name, won in Maine. We're hoping that might go Democratic. It did not. Susan Collins.
Yeah, there's three out there. It's almost for sure the Republicans will hold it by 1 or 2 votes.
Wow.
Which means, as we look at our stuff, the technology choices coming out of Washington, it's going to have to, on many of them, they're going to have to compromise if it has to go through the Senate. Excuse me.
No, Dave, are you looking at any specific bills, or are you just talking generally speaking?
Well, the one that everybody talks about is net neutrality. Net neutrality is going to be enforced clearly by the Democrats who will take control of the FCC. Some people want to get it through Congress. And to my surprise, the House is now solidly in favor of net neutrality. I looked at it closely, and it came up last time, 2010. AT&T, SBC, was it? Yeah, it was already AT&T. Clearly owned enough Democratic congressmen to block it. That's not true anymore. But I don't think any bill that AT&T opposes will make it through the Senate. So we have to look at 2022. In 2022, 2/3 of the seats coming up are Republican.
In the Senate?
Chance to solve that.
David, just clarify. In 2022, 2/3 of the Senate seats are up for grabs again. Is that it?
No, 2/3 of the seats that are up for grabs, which is 34 or so, are currently Republican.
Okay, but that's still a lot. There are only 100 senators.
Yes, but you only need 1 or 2 more to
flip.
Win.
Yes.
So if you flip, there are, I think it's 11 Democrats and 22 Republicans coming up in 2 years.
Okay.
So if you flip 1 or 2 of those,
gotcha.
It's changed.
So now back to the net neutrality issue. What would be the practical impact of the Democrats coming into the FCC and putting a real net neutrality regulatory scheme back in place? What will be the actual impact of that?
Get back to you. What has been the effect of the Republicans at the FCC killing net neutrality?
Well, we certainly have seen the costs go up for consumers.
That's got nothing to do with net neutrality.
Okay, well, that
has to do with competition or regulation. You put net neutrality. Net neutrality is about what the carriers can do to block or control what gets across to you. That's not really about censorship, although I fight in favor of net neutrality because it could become about censorship. It's the telcos want to put a tax on everything coming through the internet, especially YouTube and Netflix. But have you seen any interesting differences in the video coming across the net?
Not that I can tell, but so much of that is invisible. We don't know what online providers there are out there that we're not seeing that are being blocked. But, we don't know. I don't know anyway from where I sit. So it's kind of it's a very subtle filter if it's actually in place. What's your take?
And absolutely right, including that the results so far have been very subtle. And I see that as saying that the 4 or 5 big carriers that we're talking about were smart enough not to abuse anything and not to get the whole country riled up about net neutrality again. So they're collecting a little bit more from the Netflixes of the world, and definitely AT&T is giving priority to home box office, which they own, but it hasn't been a really big thing. So turning it around won't be a really big thing. I'm much more concerned about what the Democrats can and probably won't do to make sure everybody's connected. What's your thoughts on how important that is?
I think it's critical. I mean, I'm looking at the Universal Service Fund, and just today, T-Mobile was fined $200 million, which is a drop in the bucket for them. But nevertheless, they're fined for fraudulently billing on almost 900,000 so-called low-income customers for the $9 a month Lifeline service that never got it. And I mean, it's really infuriating there to me, as a person who's an advocate for low-income folks getting broadband for working to bridge the digital divide, to see it's not consumers that are defrauding the system, which is what you would hear in the popular press. You certainly hear it from the Republicans as folks try and promote universal service. Oh, it's fraught with negative things and illegalities. Well, the people that are perpetrating the illegalities are the actual carriers themselves. I mean, it's disgusting.
Absolutely. And it's not clear that the Democrats who are going to take over are going to do a much better job. I sure hope they do, and that's something we're going to want to work on. Excuse me a moment.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Carry on for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so the Universal Service Fund was originally put in place by the FCC decades ago to ensure that folks had telephone service, that there was universal telephone service. More recently, it's been expanded to include both wireless and wireline broadband. So it's a $9, I think 25 cents a month subsidy that goes to the carrier that delivers service to low-income consumers. So it's a great way theoretically to bring service potentially at no cost. That would be something that I would advocate for. It's a way to bring service at no cost to low-income consumers that need it, like the million or so folks in New York City that don't have broadband at home, that are low income, that need free access to broadband. The Universal Service Fund will be an ideal way to do that. And it's so fraught with mismanagement, but the mismanagement, as I said, is on the side of the carriers. It's not consumers that are defrauding the system, it's the carriers themselves. I'd also like to see that system opened up to small carriers, such as the community network folks that you and I work with, Digital Divide Partners and others in New York City, that are working to provide free service to low-income communities, especially public housing communities. That subsidy should be available to community network operators like those so that they can provide free service at no cost to the end users. And it should not just be for the so-called major carriers who in fact don't need it. You look at their balance sheets, you look at their revenues, it's off the chart. Even in this COVID environment, the technology companies, the carrier companies are doing swell, making record profits. So it's a travesty that program is not really being applied in a meaningful way. Hopefully the Dems come in, they may turn it around.
The number that everybody forgets, because they have some of the best lobbyists and influence people in the world, is that both Verizon and AT&T look to make about $20 billion this year each.
When you say make, you're talking about profit.
That's profit.
Mm-hmm.
That's real numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And they may budget a few billion to make it look better to Wall Street, but there's no doubt that they can afford any reasonable policy, starting with universal service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, will Jessica Rosenwasser or Minion Clyburn make this happen? They've both been on the commission and they haven't made it happen yet.
Yeah. So now, tell us about that, Dave. Your take on the commission, presuming that Biden comes in. How does that happen? He doesn't get rid of commissioners. He just changes the chairmanship, or are there vacancies, or what's the status?
Okay, the 5 commissioners, and by tradition, and I think by law, 3 of them can come from the majority party. 2 of them have to come from the minority party.
Mm-hmm.
There's an open Republican seat because, to a lot of people's surprise, one of the Republican commissioners stood up to Donald Trump when he wanted to use the FCC to start censoring the internet.
Hmm.
And he said, that's not what we're here for.
Now, who was that, Dave?
That's Mike O'Reilly,
Mm-hmm.
who at that point, his term had ended, and he had been renominated by Trump for another term,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted it. And he refused to go along with Trump's plans to change Section 230 in order to force the internet companies to stop doing things like putting notices on, this may not be accurate, on Donald Trump's tweets. At which point Donald Trump took back the recommendation, nominated somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
who may still get through Congress, but probably won't. So we're looking at one open Republican seat, a Democratic chairman. The chairman is highly likely, not guaranteed, but highly likely to be either current FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, who I've known for 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
or recent FCC Commissioner Mignon Clyburn.
Mm-hmm. Who is the daughter of Congressman Clyburn.
Absolutely.
By the way.
But one of the things that she proved, when she got the nomination, she'd been an obscure commissioner from South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people were saying, oh, she got it because her daddy is the number 2 Democrat in the House. She proved she's strong, independent, knocked herself out on issues like the ripoff of prisoner phone calls,
Mm-hmm.
was
Right.
solid on every issue out there.
Mm-hmm.
A strong woman, an intelligent woman. I'd be delighted if she becomes the next chairman.
Mm-hmm.
And if that happens, and if she happens to get the nod over Jessica because Joe Biden wants to be good to her daddy, well, that wouldn't be a bad thing.
Wasn't that her dad that put Biden over the top in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken?
It's more complicated than that.
But
But
I
her
mean,
dad,
he endorsed him, going back prior to Joe getting the nomination. He made an endorsement that really kind of moved Joe forward, as I recall.
he didn't win the state in this election, although it was much closer than anybody expected.
Yeah.
Jim Clyburn went to jail in the civil rights era.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's true. One story is that he met his wife there.
Oh, wow.
I don't think that's true, but somebody did write that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just interject, Dave. It's 1:15 for our listeners and viewers. This is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. This is Community and Technology. Dave Burstein and Stu Reid, and we're talking about the election and the impact on technology, in particular the FCC. And Dave's just been telling us about Mignon Clyburn, the daughter of Jim Clyburn, the representative from South Carolina, who could potentially be named the new FC chair.
Yeah. Now, the other logical candidate is current sitting commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel.
Mm-hmm.
I've known her since 2000.
Okay, what's your take on her then?
She's a exceedingly smart, exceedingly hardworking woman who's earned respect from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
The most dramatic thing she did is when she was a staffer to was it Michael Cobbs? No. She was a staffer to one of the Democrats, I'm forgetting who, in 2004, in one of the biggest issues in competition, when one of the biggest issues in competition policy came to the FCC.
Okay.
It was making rules. At that point, most of the competition had died. That there was Covad Rhythms North Point building across the country in 2000 and all bust by 2003. Competition was a great dream. It hasn't worked in US broadband.
Mhm.
There was, however, one lively competitor out there, or potential competitor. They hadn't been strong, but they actually bought the assets and all the equipment from North Point, and that was the old AT&T long lines.
Mhm.
And a bill or a proposal came from Mike Powell, who was the FCC chair, that would have had the practical effect of wiping out AT&T's chances of being a competitor. Has to do with a whole lot of things like line sharing and so on. Everybody knew what was at stake. The Republicans had the majority. Jessica Rosenworcel, working with Dan Gonzalez, beat it back. Dan Gonzalez was Kevin Martin's, was not Sherman then, key aide.
Mhm.
She was well along in her pregnancy
Mhm.
and worked till about 5 a.m. It was really a dramatic day. We all knew it was big things.
Mhm.
In fact, I think I was down. Yeah, I was down there at the FCC waiting to hear it happened,
Wow, covering the
which is why I
story.
know these
Mhm.
details. As I say, she was well along in her pregnancy. She worked almost all the night, was back 3 hours later. The vote was scheduled for 10 a.m. I was in the room, and suddenly they said, the vote will be delayed. The meeting will be delayed for several hours. And it came out that Jessica and Dan were rewriting the proposal in order to keep a hope alive of competition. Republican Kevin Martin, serious Bush operator, very conservative, said to me at the time, you can't have competition without competitors. I'm
Duh.
not sure I do things with competition and not government, but he was also a smart and honest guy, very
Mhm.
smart and completely honest. When he became chairman, he put his job and career on the line twice on issues that almost nobody else noticed.
Mhm.
Okay.
It's Kevin Martin you're talking about.
I'm sorry?
This is Kevin Martin.
This is Kevin Martin, once Republican chair of the FCC,
Mhm.
now quiet vaccines operator at a high level at Facebook.
Mhm.
Does things like negotiate on behalf of Facebook whether or not they pay taxes in Korea,
Mhm. Mhm.
which they agreed to do, which they haven't done in India or anywhere else. The Koreans stood up to Facebook and said, well, if you're not going to pay taxes, we're just not going to have to cut you off.
Wow.
And he was the guy who went there and made a compromise on that.
Mhm.
Jessica is strong, smart, but so tied into the thinking in Washington that has been so dominated by the $100 million a year budget, influence budgets of AT&T and Verizon and Comcast,
Mhm.
and now Google and Facebook, that when you talk to her privately, and I could give you an example here about universal service and reaching the poor, but it was a private conversation. She's
Mhm.
strong. She hasn't gone to the wall, and she hasn't shown she understands. She definitely has a mild case of beltway blindness.
Mhm.
That I know what she believes in. I respect her enormously. I respect what she believes in, but she hasn't seen through some of the nonsense being thrown around DC.
Mhm.
I actually supported her in 2012 for Obama's second term. Obama eventually chose Tom Wheeler. Uh, she'd be good. So I'm
Who's the third Democrat on the commission?
uh, at the moment, it's the second. It's a career FCC enforcement guy, a black
Mhm.
man whose name I'm forgetting.
Okay.
And there will be another Democrat. So it is easy for Biden to appoint Minion again and make her chairman,
Mhm.
or to anoint Jessica as chairman and appoint somebody else.
Mhm. Now, Dave, let me ask. I know I used to be many moons ago. I was a political appointee in the Carter administration, And I know that when the administration changed, I got booted when the Republicans came in. I was a political appointee. Do the chairmen and chair people of the FCC have to tender a resignation and be reappointed with the change of administration?
No.
Okay. They have a term.
But even if your party wins re-election, i.e. if Trump had won, the FCC chair does resign, sticks to 4 years, and lets somebody else come in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Pai could stay on if he wanted to. He probably won't. There's a $3 million a year job waiting for him at any major Washington law firm.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that number is real, $3
Mm-hmm.
million a year. It's based on what other people like him are making. Or I think he wants to go into politics and run for the Senate in Kansas, where he comes from.
Really? Wow.
He's been acting like he's running for office on a whole lot of things.
Mm.
Okay, he's mixed. He is an honest, smart, conservative Republican, extremely conservative Republican, Federalist Society type, who is brilliant on the law of communications and has no real sense of what it's like in the real world of the networks.
Mm-hmm.
So again, and he did a terrible job at doing things like reducing waste and universal service. I smiled when I saw the $200 million fine for T-Mobile.
Mm-hmm.
The heads of T-Mobile have been strongly Democratic in this election.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I believe donating to Biden, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Now that infraction, just point of information, that infraction was actually incurred by Sprint, was it not, who was acquired by T-Mobile? Isn't that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
It's a terribly corrupt rip-off system. It's even worse on the money they give to the small rural telcos.
Mm.
Everybody in Washington knows that. I can give you the names of 3 academics who go on the.
Oh, so this is not an anomaly, this particular being caught with fraudulently billing.
It's massive. My guess is the 2/3 of the $6 billion a year spent is wasted. And Pai's done a pretty good job. He may, with things like setting up auctions, have cut that down to only 50%.
Mm-hmm.
It was tried, but there's still much, much more to go. And more than enough to connect every school kid in the country for free. We worked out those numbers on this show.
Yes, we did.
It is absolutely, the money is there to give a 25/3 internet connection to every school kid. So I'm going to do something I have never had occasion to do in the past.
What's that?
I don't do too many political endorsements. I'm mostly a tech reporter. I've done a few, and I'm going to endorse again Maya Wiley, who's running for mayor in New York, because she stuck her neck out on trying to hold back the Verizon grab of the Wi-Fi spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Almost nobody in politics realized what was going on. And she sent a major New York City filing down to Washington. So that's an endorsement that I'm happy to make.
Okay.
I endorsed Ed Markey in Massachusetts, who had been the best guy in Congress for 20 years on every telecom issue.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had occasion to endorse a Republican, but by law or tradition, there will be a Republican. Yes, there's an open seat now, and Pai's probably going to resign, will expire soon. So there will be a Republican nomination meeting. And I'm going to endorse David Reddle, who was Trump's first director of the NTIA, which makes a lot of policy decisions, including spectrum and the trade war on China. And the reason
before you explain who he is, Dan, let me just say that for our folks out there, this is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. You're listening to Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We're talking about the election and what's looking like a Biden win, Democratic win, and a likely shift in the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. And Dave Burstein, who rarely gives any kind of endorsement of politicians, is, I think, about to tell us about an FCC open slot person that he is advocating for the open slot. David Riddell, was that the name?
Breaking up here.
Come back again?
Dave Riddle.
Dave Riddle, okay.
His
Tell us
name
about
is
it.
Dave Riddle. I met him 10 years ago when he was the Republican guy in the House or Senate, I think the House. The seat has to go to a Republican, so it's not going to be somebody whose policies I generally agree with.
Mm-hmm.
But Riddle had intelligent positions that turned out to be right in how they were going to waste the money in the broadband stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
He's convinced me all the way through that while his politics don't agree with mine, he's an honest, intelligent man. And he startled me earlier this year when we were both on a panel at Columbia Seminar saying we have to connect every kid in school. That a lot of the people who knew in Washington didn't see it that way yet, but it shouldn't be a Republican or Democrat issue. At this point, when school is remote, we have to find a way to get everybody connected.
Mm-hmm.
So given that I'm never going to have somebody who basically agrees with me pulled out of today's Republican Party for that seat, I'm delighted to endorse an honest man who stuck his neck out on one of the most important issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's impressive. So now, are you going to come out and one of your publications? I know you're the publisher of.
I'll throw a note up on Net Policy News. It'll go out in some of my emails. I won't make a big thing of it because all the stuff I write is about the technology.
Mm-hmm.
But on this, when occasionally somebody does something in technology that matters, I'm willing to throw an endorsement,
Mm-hmm.
as I said,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 5 times in the last decade.
Interesting.
I've
Well,
advocated.
we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and we're talking about it again, and now I'm wondering what your thinking is. Do you think the political will might shift given potential Democratic administration, Democratic FCC, and this COVID pandemic that's driving all the kids across the country to remote learning? Do you think it's possible that there will be some sort of shift to really make universal broadband a reality?
There's absolutely going to be a shift. As I say, even some of the key Republicans are agreeing with it.
Mm-hmm.
The question is whether the shift's going to be in the small things, like the rules for the universal service and connect a quarter of the people who aren't connected now, or what you and I both think is necessary, a big shift that succeeds in connecting everybody.
Right.
And that's why I'm reluctant to speak so strongly about a hardworking, honorable, liberal Democrat, because it needs a big shift.
Mm-hmm.
These are big issues.
Yeah.
And she hasn't given evidence she's going to go further than Washington likes to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are other things happening, though, that also affect whether or not we can get decent service to everybody. Have you watched how the T-Mobile 5G build is going? And what
No, I have not. I've seen their media presence, which is all over the place, but I haven't looked under the curtain to see what's actually going on.
Yeah. Here's the bottom line. They have mid-band spectrum and are delivering 100 to 400 megabits. They're growing that really fast.
Mm-hmm.
By Christmas, they expect to have covered a third of the United States with 100 to 400 megabit service. Now, nobody needs 400 megabits. Nobody really needs 100 megabits. But the same thing that can give them high speed gives them capacity to serve more people at lower speeds.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, T-Mobile, where they're upgrading their 4G to 5G, can give 25.3, which I think is a reasonable FCC definition, to just about every kid in the country.
Let me just say for the folks that might not know of that 25.3, Dave's talking about a 25 megabit down, 3 megabit up speed for the connection.
Yeah. And that's enough for 2 simultaneous video conferences, all the surfing you want, and 2 4K and 2 HDTV programs.
So two students could be Zooming simultaneously on a connection like that.
Yeah. And T-Mobile is going to have that technical ability, which is my expertise, in a third of the U.S. by Christmas, half the U.S. by early next year, and they're going to continue to build strongly after that.
Wow.
So it means that probably 70 or 80% of the U.S. by sometime late next year will be able to get 100 megabits or more. They're averaging 300 megabits now, but they haven't sold very much of it, so it's a mostly empty network. Okay,
now Dave, break this down for some of our audience out there. You're talking about a wireless phone operator and their speed. How could that connect to a computer or a laptop in someone's home? That connection.
Yeah.
How would that work?
And Jenny happens to have one of them.
What's it called?
A little box. In fact, Sprint had it, they called it the magic box. They just put a little box, it's a router connected to 5G that puts Wi-Fi around the house.
Okay.
Just like when you have the cable comes in, it goes into a router and that connects to your house. That's easy. The problem has been that until now, there hasn't been enough capacity in wireless to do a really good job. And the reason that's changed is that since at least 2014, there's been incredible progress in wireless technology. It has nothing to do with 5G. It has to do with the use of many antennas, MIMO and massive MIMO, right, the use of more spectrum, carrier aggregation, and a lot of technical things like that. It's been happening before the 5G. The 5G adds even more when you use the higher frequencies where there's a lot of empty space, but almost nobody's doing it. But the extra spectrum in mid-band that T-Mobile now has, which it got from Sprint and is building out ferociously late, has the capacity to give all of us 100 megabits plus in most of the US to our phone, and much more important, 25 megabits literally to every school kid that's not connected. And when you turn around and look at the universal service $10 or the Comcast cable offering to poor kids at $10, and you multiply that by the number of kids who are connected now, and it's maybe 2% of the school budget. Chicago has raised enough money, half from the city, half from billionaires, and the Obamas kicked in a little bit, to connect 100,000 school children for the next 3 years.
Right.
They're using the Comcast cable. They're being charged a courtesy rate, which is essentially a wholesale rate, not a money-losing rate, not a charity rate.
Right.
Courtesy rate,
right,
of $10 a month. And there's absolutely no reason that shouldn't happen. 3 months ago across the US, everywhere there's cable, everywhere the telco has can do 25.3 or something decent, which they can't in half the country, where they never upgraded their DSL. And now T-Mobile, absolutely, and to a lesser extent Verizon, are able to do that wirelessly because the technology is getting better ferociously. The number that comes out of Verizon is that their cost per bit has been going down at 40% per year.
Wow.
Okay? That means you're doubling every 2 years. And I'm double checking with the Verizon guy that I'm going to be able to ask a question to tomorrow. Glenn Wahlberg is speaking at a conference online, whether that's still true, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond all the politics you hear and all the business talk in the industry, the wireless has gotten incredibly good compared to what it was. Good enough in the case of T-Mobile, which has the spectrum, to deliver decent broadband to a third of the US by Christmas and most of the rest sometime next year, and maybe even already today. And Verizon, which will have the spectrum in 2 years, there's an auction about to come.
Mm-hmm.
And AT&T, presumably the same in 2 years, will be able. There's so much more capacity on wireless now, or so much more capability, that wireless can be a player, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you this, Dave. Could the wireless carriers actually pose a competitive threat to the wireline internet guys?
The answer, I've been looking at that since 2008, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big thing during the planning, the US broadband plan, which I worked with, so I looked at it pretty closely there. And people hoped. But we ran the numbers on it, and it didn't look like wireless would have the capacity to do much. And it hasn't. You can now go to Verizon or AT&T and buy a wireless. You can hook it up for your phone being used as a hotspot for Wi-Fi through your house, but there hasn't been much of that. And that's why the change in the wireless capacity is something I keep coming back to, because it is now possible for wireless to give a decent connection, 4G or 5G. It's a matter of where the spectrum is, not whether it's 4G or 5G. And T-Mobile has 160 megahertz of spectrum in mid-band that they're using for this. But Verizon can do something very similar with the existing 4G, and they are. In fact, Verizon is now actively selling to 20 million locations in the US a 4G or 5G wireless service. Because all this capacity, it doesn't matter what you do on your cell phone, they can't use it all.
Right.
There's more capacity. There's wild amounts of unused capacity in most of the country, and that's just going to go up because the technology that is already being deployed in the field is going to deliver it over the next few years. So my business point, I look at the industry, enormous capacity, and from policy point, but from the point of view of somebody talking on the radio, I say, well, it's now technically possible, and you guys have to find the political way, and affordable, and you guys have to find the political way to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope they do.
Yeah, you guys being this incoming administration.
Yeah, and they're going to work on it. They're going to do some things. I hope they'd be really strong, but they haven't been under the 8 years the Democrats had control under Obama.
Yeah, that was disappointing. I've talked about that on the show. I don't want to sound like sour grapes, but we were so excited when Obama first came in, and he was talking about on his platform and in his stump speeches, first term, broadband, how critical that was, that everybody have it, and wow, my hopes were soaring, as were the folks that I work with here in New York City.
I broke out in tears when he got elected. It
was
one of the great nights of my life.
Yeah.
And in our stuff, in telecom, he didn't do very much.
No,
I hate to say it.
Very disappointing.
Yeah.
Very disappointing.
About 5 minutes, and let me throw you one piece because it's a practical one.
Okay.
As I said, T-Mobile now has a real 5G, third of the country. You can get 100, 200 megabits. You don't need it? I wouldn't buy a new phone just to get it. If you do buy a new phone, you probably now or soon will want to go to 5G. 2 levels. Half of the phones in the US, close to half, are iPhones. And all the new iPhones are 5G, able on T-Mobile to give you typical 200 megabits down. I wouldn't go out and buy a phone for that purpose, but if it was time for me to buy a new phone, that's a good thing. Now, if you're not going to spend the money, which is $800 and more for an iPhone, you're not really ready to jump into 5G because most of the phones in the US, 5G cost $500, and that's the bottom. Most of them are $700 to $1,000. In China, some of those same phones cost between $199 US and $270 US.
Oh.
It's enormously competitive, and the chip makers and the phone makers have mastered 5G mid-band. Verizon millimeter wave, but that's just so little of that. It's not much of a factor. So what I can tell you is that the prices in China are $200 and $300 less, literally half the prices in the US at this point. They will converge, they will come down, so that two things. One, if you think you might want a new phone, don't want to spend iPhone type money, but you don't really need it, I'd wait a few months, because this is one of prices of everything come down in electronics, but this is a point there's going to be a big difference. And the other thing is, we look forward to the future. The difference in price between 4G and 5G is so little in China now that 70% of the new phones bought are 5G. Especially this week, where not merely is it $199 to $270 on 4 brands, one of the fifth brand, Realme, a legitimate, respected manufacturer, decided for the big 11 sale stuff that's like our Black Friday, come down to $150 for a 6.5-inch multi-camera, perfectly decent 5G phone. In fact, it would be tempting if this Chinese events that I would have been going to before were bringing me over. And they're not letting Americans in by and large right now for very good reason. I might be tempted to come back with one of them and make it work on T-Mobile because it's the same spec. Now, last thing before I let you finish up the show to know, the rates in New York City are going up. They're still much lower than most of the country. The numbers across the country are horrifying. 99,000 in one day, 94,000 in another day.
You're talking about COVID now.
Back to COVID, which is got to be top of the mind. You've got to continue being extremely careful. But we shouldn't say that's all just because it's Donald Trump, because it's exploding even more in Europe. The rate in France and England is double the rate in the United States. This is horrifying. There probably will be a vaccine that will probably be mostly effective, starting in a few months, getting out there over 2 years. The treatment is getting better, so if you have anything like symptoms, get yourself to a doctor and a hospital immediately. The death rate is down by half. Still pretty high, still to be afraid of. So there's very good progress, but until that really gets out there and changes things, please be careful.
Absolutely.
And Stu, you're working on the public health stuff, so you can give them some advice on how to do it to wrap up the show. I've got to do an interview for an Australian publication in a few minutes. So I'm going to let you wrap up.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. I've been speaking with Dave Burstein and myself, Stu Reid, about the what we think is a pending change in administration here in the U.S. government and its impact on telecom policy, on the FCC, on the prospects of actually getting a true universal broadband to low-income folks that need it. And you know, we're hopeful. We don't really know what's going to happen. The technology is out there. The pricing is coming way down. We're hoping that some of these new folks coming in will find the political will to actually make it happen. The last point, Dave was speaking about COVID and the fact that it looks like we are, at least in New York, starting to get it under control, but it still is raging across the U.S. Just to remind folks to be cautious, to continue to wear the masks. There's just more and more evidence that this virus is in fact airborne, can travel through the air, can live in the air for some time. So the masks are critical. Washing your hands on a frequent basis with soap, 20 seconds or more, critical. And just being very careful in just how you move about. And in particular, as the holiday season approaches, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Hanukkah and other holidays around the end of the year and beginning of the new year, just be cautious. And hopefully we all can refrain from the large social gatherings, which we traditionally do. It's just not advised. It's recommended that you stay within your bubble, that being the folks that you have on an ongoing day-to-day basis interact with, that you continue to keep that bubble tight and closed, and extend yourself to your family and friends across the country, across the city, on a virtual basis for this holiday season. We want everyone to stay safe and enter the new year healthy and in good shape. So that's the final word from Community and Technology. It's been Stu Reid here with Dave Burstein. Wish everyone well, and we'll be back next week on Community and Technology, 5 p.m., 90.3 FM, talking about AI, automated intelligence, and its disproportionate impact in the healthcare field on Black and Brown folks. Thanks for tuning in. Community and Technology, 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. See you next week.